everyone. I'm Danielle Belton. As she said, I'm editor-in-chief of HuffPost, and I'm so honored to be here with John Harmon with the African American Chamber of Commerce here in New Jersey, and Rod Priestley, the Vice Dean for Innovation and founder of Aquapal. Did I pronounce that correctly?
That is correct.
Oh my God, it's twice a day I pronounce something correctly. You don't know how hard this is for me. Like, I suck at pronouncing things. Partly it's because of the fact that when I was a kid, I read on a really high level, and I would just make up my own pronunciations for words. So it's a disaster. Don't do it. So what we're here to talk about today is the economic state of Black America, what it is and what it could be. And so I thought we could hop around for a few different topic areas to kind of dig into what some of the problem areas are, and then talk about some solutions. So first off, let's just talk about what's going on here in New Jersey. What improvements do you think have taken place in New Jersey when it comes to the economics of Black folks, and where are some areas of struggle or points of pain?
So first of all, I'm glad to be here, and I would like to just level set by giving a little statistics on Blacks in New Jersey. So there's about 1.2 million Blacks in New Jersey. We have the highest poverty, the highest unemployment, low median income, 35% home ownership, and net worth is about $5,900 versus $315,000 for whites in the state. So let's kind of level set there. About 80 to 100,000 Black businesses. The positive thing is that, post George Floyd's death, there's been an outpouring from the private sector, banks, corporations, seeking to forge alliance with the Chamber to connect with Black businesses and Black communities. In addition, there's a number of initiatives being driven by state government, particularly the New Jersey Economic Development Authority, is technical assistance. And so, within the last year and a half, there's been some real encouraging signs. But the numbers that I just stated underscores the significant lift that has to be done to close the gap. And so that's the challenge, getting folks at the table to have some real substantive discussions about how we move the needle in a more equitable way.
So what are some areas that you think that the government could be more involved, that could step in more here in New Jersey?
Well, New Jersey is a highly unionized state. Mm-hmm. And so what that means for me is that everyone pays taxes into the public domain, but we don't benefit equitably from the economic opportunities. So if government could create ways in which that everyone could compete, I'm not saying give you anything, but allow us to have access to these publicly funded opportunities, I think it could be transformational. But that is a big barrier in the state, that our tax dollars are funding a lot of public initiatives, but the barriers to entry are not equitable.
And for me, when I think about this, it's from the viewpoint of education, higher education in particular. And I think perhaps the only correlation that may connect to economic outcomes, wealth creation, generation, et cetera, is education and educational attainment and achievement. And so for me, when I think about the state of the Black economy in New Jersey, I immediately come to opportunities. Are we making sure that everyone is having the opportunities to have an outstanding K through 12 education that would then prepare them to go to college and then come out of college and have a very well high-paying job, good benefits, et cetera, to buy their own home that would lead to value. And so for me, when I think about opportunities, it's about how do we enhance the pipeline of more Blacks in higher education.
Now, you brought up a good point. I'm a strong proponent. I'm really big on education. Mm-hmm. Education was a game changer in my family. Mm-hmm. Both my parents grew up in abject poverty. My mother's the daughter of sharecroppers. My father was the daughter of a domestic worker and a shoe shiner. Mm-hmm. And the only way my parents got out of poverty in the 1960s and 70s and 80s was because of their ability to get a higher education. Mm-hmm. But the reality is, it's become more difficult. It's been much more expensive to get a 4-year degree than it was for either of my parents when they were achieving such. And so you even have some people arguing whether or not college is even necessary, considering how cost prohibitive it can be upon one's life in terms of student loans, the debt that lots of young people are still dealing with, sometimes 10, 20 years out from being out of college. How do we remedy this issue? How do we make it more equitable for Black students to achieve a higher education?
Sure. I think as an educator myself, one thing I want to clarify, I think going to higher education is extremely important for wealth generation, et cetera. But there are also other important reasons why one should go to college beyond just generating wealth and making sure you get a high-paying job. In terms of the question, in terms of how do we make it more equitable, I agree the current model is not sustainable. If you look at the most expensive institutions in the U.S., you only have to extrapolate 10, 15 years down the road, and these institutions will be costing $100,000 per year. And I'm just waiting for the first institution to come out with that number. And I can imagine the blowback that's going to exist. And so the model, in fact, does have to change. But what I also think is critical is for people to recognize the resources that are out there. And so there is also an information gap that exists that we do need to get out into our communities. And so for some of the most expensive schools, Princeton, my institution, for instance, is effectively a need-blind school, meaning you only pay what your family can afford. The cost of tuition may be $60,000, $70,000, but the university calculates what your parents can afford, and they pay the rest. And so today on the campus of Princeton, 25% of the students pay nothing with regards to tuition and fees, nothing with regards to housing and dining, and 60% have some slated gradient in terms of financial aid. But what is also true simultaneously is that if we have 25% of the undergraduate population that pays nothing for their education, 40% can pay everything, and it doesn't impact their quality of life at all. So there's this huge dichotomy in terms of the haves and have-nots on institutions that we also have to address as well. But I completely agree that the model in terms of continued rise in price is unsustainable, and we will have to do something about it.
So let me just follow up on that. I think as I looked at the folks out in the audience, that was a revelation for many folks. So this is a good dissemination of information, let them know that Princeton is accessible. But to your earlier point, in terms of the quality of education, being able to meet the prerequisites in order to get in, that is a challenge in many communities across the state. Again, I'm trying to stay as positive as I can. Recently, in New Jersey, if your household income is $65,000 or less, you can go to a 4-year school, state school in New Jersey. So that's making education a little more affordable, a little more accessible. But again, the K-12 system, we have to get greater accountability to ensure that our kids are prepared to compete in the 21st century, notwithstanding if they go to college or they choose another vocation to feed their families.
Well, let's talk about the K-12 system for a little bit. One of the things that became really apparent in 2020 was how deep the digital divide exists between Black households and non-Black households in this country, in the sense that suddenly our children had to get their education from home, but they didn't have access to Wi-Fi. They didn't own tablets to be able to go to class. And now you have, essentially in some cases, a generation of students who are behind by 2 or more years because of the fact they didn't have the same access to the technology. They need to get the education necessary for them. What do we do about that?
Well, technology, we know, levels the playing field. And I look at the young people today, and they use these devices as if they have a mainframe computer. I mean, the capacity and the innovation in the heads of some of these young people is just transformational. So having access to technology and all those tools that come along with it could get people in a whole nother stratosphere as it relates to, entrepreneurship or entertainment or being creative to display their works. connecting with people throughout the world. I'll give you an example of something that was not good. When the pandemic hit the state of New Jersey, there were a host of moratoriums. Everything was closed, but Best Buy was open. And so we looked at the policies, and so your local technology stores like Cricket and PC Metro, they were closed. And those typically are in urban locations in close proximity. You got the kids at home. And so that's the disconnect between those who are setting policy and serving the whole constituency of the state. So we stepped in, was able to get that mandate changed and afforded more folks access to technology. But the long and short of it, it is a game changer, and we need to get more people on the grid, expand broadband as much as we can.
And I'll just add, it's only going to become more important. I think one of the things the pandemic did show, beyond the differences in terms of access to the internet, et cetera, is its importance. And once you have this change in saying, well, you can actually do education online, then that push is just going to continue. There was already this push towards virtual education and higher education, but now you see it even more so in K through 12 because we've had this experiment. And so it's even more important that we make sure that we close the digital divide.
So I want to talk a little bit about entrepreneurship. There's a lot of talk, like I always joke like on the phenomenon of Black Twitter, where Twitter is, we're overrepresented on the app where lots of people have lots of conversations. There are always these jokes about LLC Twitter, which is all about folks who are trying to talk about the business opportunities and how we can grow in that capacity. What more could the state of New Jersey, what more could our federal government be doing in terms of making it easier for people to go into business? Because the reality is, because of the pandemic, Black businesses took a huge hit. Many of them are shuttered and might not ever come back. What can we do to help support the businesses that we still have and encourage more entrepreneurship among those who want to come out?
Well, to your point, during the height of the pandemic, about 41% of Black businesses were closed and never to be open again. The encouraging news is that the state, so that means the public sector and the private sector, are really trying to coalesce relationships with those who have the entrepreneurial aptitude, spirit, and desire. So that's encouraging. Also, I would say, connect with your Chamber of Commerce, because many, although Booker T. Washington in 1900 founded the Negro Business League, that was 12 years before the U.S. Chamber, many Black businesses or Black people are not connected to the Chamber of Commerce, and that is the heart of free enterprise and capitalism. So that would be one suggestion. But if you really want to create wealth and have no cap on your earnings, starting your own business is the way to go. There's a number of free resources through the Small Business Development Centers to help you with your business plan. We do technical assistance. So, use the broadband, use your phone to find us and let us find you. But at the end of the day, if you want to start a business, there's no better time than now.
And I look at this from this pipeline of research, innovation, and entrepreneurship, this idea of tough tech entrepreneurship, hard tech entrepreneurship, the technologies that are going to basically solve the problems of the day. How can we be involved in those types of startups, those types of creations? And I will say, for me at Princeton, we are doing some things to advance the cause. If you go to empower.princeton.edu, you will find that we just held a conference specifically on Black academic entrepreneurship. How do you go from basic research to creating startups that are based on university research? There's an entire ecosystem out there that exists that people try and tap into that intellectual property. And VCs, startup founders, they come in and they take advantage of the university IP and ecosystem, and they create unicorns, they create startups. And making sure that Black and brown entrepreneurs are involved in that ecosystem is exactly what we did in the Empower Conference. It effectively was a pipeline in terms of how do you do this. If you go to start.princeton.edu, this is another program we just launched, and I'm really excited about it. When I was thinking about, what can an academic institution do to support inclusive entrepreneurship? What startup founders really need is capital. And so I kept coming back to capital. And I said, well, we can create an academic accelerator that allows people to nucleate startups based off academic research in-house and then spin off to our incubator. But they need the capital to that. And when I went to the upper administration and said, look, this is what I want to do, and this is going to connect to our inclusive entrepreneurship programs, they bought it. And so this program was launched last week. So if you go to start.princeton.edu, we'll be launching this program.
As a follow-up, and I think that's great, one of the things that we do at the African American Chamber of New Jersey, we have an entrepreneurship program for ex-offenders, because many men and women who come out of institutions can't get jobs, but they can start their own business. It's funded by the state. It's funded by, we just got some money from Bank of America to start another cohort. So that's an opportunity there. So there, you just got to find a way to get into the ecosystem. AACCNJ.com. We host a number of webinars about business and entrepreneurship. Sometimes you just got to step out of the box. And it's not as complicated as people make it out to be. A business plan basically starts with answering basic questions. Who, when, what, why, how, right? As you answer those questions, and if you answer them and it makes sense, the responses make sense, you're halfway there, and then you just got to get the numbers behind it to make sure you can monetize it for a profit.
Well, it makes a lot of sense. So when I look out at this crowd, like this is an amazing crowd we have here today. Just in attendance for this outstanding event. And we have a lot of people who are business leaders, a lot of people who are involved in the tech industry. We have some publishers here. So I'm wondering, and I know that some of them are wondering, because I get this question all the time, well, how can I get involved? How can I help? How can I support Black education or entrepreneurship or Black-owned businesses? What can my company do? What can I do as an individual to make a difference?
Well, I mean, for me, just raise your hand and we have a sidebar. But today, we've embarked on a major initiative to increase more Blacks on corporate boards, help corporations diversify their supply chain by introducing some of our members to those opportunities. In addition, employment. There's great outreach for Black individuals to work in some of New Jersey's greatest companies. Lastly, corporate citizenship investment, corporations back into the communities, like I mentioned the ex-offender entrepreneurship program. That's a transformer. We have our microloan program, starting as low as $10,000 for small businesses. So there's a lot of ways you can help, and we're here to respond. Once I come down, we'd love to have you.
Excellent. I'm on my third startup. I successfully exited one. And what I can say is the barriers are real. They, in fact, do exist, and they don't go away if you achieve higher level of education or you're successful in your research or win awards. They still exist, and I can give examples offline of how I know they exist. And so you ask what people can do to help. I would say just reach out. We're always looking for mentors and advisors for the founders that we are supporting at Princeton. If you go to innovation.princeton.edu, you can find us there, and I'd be happy to have a conversation on the site as well.
All right, awesome. We don't have a ton of time left, but I know a lot of folks probably would love to learn more about what both of you are doing. What's the easiest way to follow or reach either of you?
Yeah, for me, info@aaccnj.com or hashtag AACCNJ.
Again, you can go to innovation.princeton.edu, but because academic institutions are open, if you search my name, my information pops up right away.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much, John and Rod.